All right, everybody, welcome back. We are going to look at how to create a pin in Fusion, and then we're going to actually turn this on a wood lathe and assemble it. So we're going to start a new design. We're going to do a hybrid design because it's going to be made up of a bunch of different components to make up our pin. So we're going to hit Create New, and then we're going to save it, and we'll call this Pin Design Spring 26. And we're going to start with our brass tubes. So there are some brass insert tubes that go into our pin. That's where we're going to start. So I'm going to right click and go to New Component, and we can give it a name of brass tube and hit Enter. And now we've got these two brass tubes that we're going to put into our part. So it's basically a hollow tube, which makes it really easy to design. So I'm going to just do it on this face right here. And it's two circles that are concentric. And then I just need to dimension them. So I'm going to use my dial caliper, and I'm going to measure the outer dimension of the tube, and that is 0.266 is what I'm getting. So first dimension, 0.266, and then the inner dimension is 0.249 is what I'm seeing, 0.249. So, really thin tube. It's a thin-walled brass tube. And then once I do that, I'm going to do an extrusion of just that thin wall. And it doesn't matter which way, up or down, forward or backward. I'm going to go this way. And then let's see what we have here. Let's measure that. I think it's just roughly over 2 inches here. So we're going to measure 2 inches and 25 thousandths. So it's 2.025. So 2.025, 2 inches and 25 thousandths. And let's go ahead and change the material while we're at it. So the cool thing is I can right click, go to physical material, go into metal, and if I scroll down to brass, see there's brass tube, and I'm just going to highlight over to that and then close it out. So pause the video, make your brass tube. Here's the dimensions one more time for that. The two circles are 0.266. The outer one, and 0.249 is the inner. And then our extrusion is 2.025 right here. And that creates our brass tube. All right, there's our brass tube. We're eventually going to make a copy of that and paste it because we need two in our system. But we'll wait on that for the time being. We're going to do the middle ring and then assemble the middle ring to this brass tube. So I'm going to turn the brass tube off, the visibility. I'm going to right click and do a new component, and we'll call this center ring. So this is a little ring that comes in the kit, and it's a cylinder. It's very similar. We're making it just like we made the brass tube. We're going to create a sketch on this surface. We're going to make two circles, and then we're just going to dimension those two circles. So the outer circle dimension is 0.348. And then the inner dimension of this, it fits over top of the brass tube. So it should be just, and there's a little bit of friction there. So this is 0.250. So 0.25. So if you remember the brass tube, it was, I take that back. This center ring does not go on the brass tube. The center ring goes on the mechanism that fits into the brass tube. So the smaller circle on the brass tube is 0.249, and then you have this mechanism that's going to press into that, and then this goes on top of the mechanism, which is essentially the same diameter as the brass tube when you do it. So we're going to finish that sketch. We're going to do an extrusion, And now we're going to look at the thickness of this ring, and it is 0.177. So 0.177 is its thickness. And then you can do all sorts of fun things like putting fillets or whatever on these, because it does have a little bit of a fillet on these edges. They're kind of soft edges, so we could put like a 0.01 fillet. Maybe that's a little much, maybe a 5/1000 fillet on those. And that's pretty good. Now, we can change the material here as well. So in my class, you have the option of like a gold color, a silver color, a dark, like kind of black, dark chrome color, or like this like rose gold color. I'm going to use this dark anodized silver. I like this here. So I'm going to put that on and make all my parts that anodized silver for this. And now if we turn our brass tube on, we should see two parts. We've got our ring and our brass tube. And we're ready to now kind of do an assembly so we can see some geometries that are going to happen here with the wood and with our brass tube. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to use a joint constraint, and I'm going to join the center of this ring. So if I hold down Control, I can select the center of that, and I want it to go on the end in the center of this brass tube. So they're going to line up just like that. Okay, so I'm joining the ring to the end of the brass tube. Now notice the ring doesn't go on the brass tube, it's just sitting on the end, because like I said, there's going to be a mechanism that sticks out of this that this actually press fits onto. But for now, this is good because we're going to need it to make the front part of our wood piece. So we would have a tip on the end of this. I'm not going to model the pin tip for you. I think you should be able to kind of challenge yourself and go through that one. But once we do all the rest of the pieces, you'll see it's the same thing. We can draw a profile, and then we're going to revolve a profile around an axis. But let's make the wood piece, the front piece of our pin. So the first step in that is make a new component. I'm going to call this wood front. And I'm going to leave these visible now. And I'm going to create a sketch on the plane that goes right through the middle of the brass tube. So it's this one right here, this vertical plane that goes right through the middle of the brass tube. Now I could do this one here as well, but I like this one right here. So I'm going to click on this because I want to see the brass tube and I want to see this ring right here. So I'm going to now use a project P, and I'm going to project the brass tube and the ring and say OK, because these are the points that I want. I want this point up here. I want this point down here. I want this point so that I can start making my geometries. So watch what I do here. I'm going to right click and make a rectangle that goes all the way to this, but not touching that. It's actually going to touch down here, but it's going to be the same height as this. Okay, and it might be easier to remove the fillet from this part, but it's okay. I'm going to use the coincident constraint to make this coincident with this, and then I'm going to say a horizontal constraint between these two so it's the exact same height. And the last thing I'm going to do is construct a construction line. So I hit L and then X, and I'm going to go right down the midline of this and just double click, and I'm going to finish my sketch. This is the most basic of basic pins that you could literally have. So I did a revolve of that around that axis, and when I say OK, I'm going to right click and go to physical material. I'm going to click on wood, and I'm going to scroll down to a type of wood down here. I'm going to use walnut, and I'm going to put it onto this piece. And now I'm going to activate all the parts. So you can see what this pin is going to look like. It's literally going to be glued. The brass tube is going to be inserted into the wood and glued in there. And then when we press it all together, it should have a nice smooth transition between the wood and this ring that's in the middle, because it's a twist ring or a twist pin. Let me show you an example of that. Here's what they look like. This is what we're trying to design. You can see there's the center ring. Here's the wood piece. That's the front part. And we have this very slimline detail. Now see how this has a little curvature to it? And then depending on the design, you can kind of design it however you want. But the most basic is just making a straight shot right across. But we're using a wood lathe. We want it to look nice and flowy. But we know the diameter of this part of the pin. We know the diameter of the ring that's in the middle, and we know the diameter of the cap. They're all the same. So when we create our blank of wood, when we go in here and look at this ring diameter is consistent with what the pin diameter, the tip. So there would technically be a tip down here. I'm just going to pretend draw it. That would go like this, not like that. I'm just going to draw the profile of it. Okay, so this is what the pin tip would look like. And then if you were to revolve that with it, you'll see that it makes like a nice transition there from the pin tip, which is going to be metal. It's going to be the same kind of metal as this, into the wood piece that's going to go right here. I'm just trying to show you what we're eventually going to be doing. We're not going to actually revolve this. You'll have a pin tip that you make that's a separate component. But I just want you to see, it should be a smooth transition. That's why we're doing this rectangle. And now this is the fun part. I like to use the spline tool, and I can go in and I can now make something that goes to all these points and then ends right here, and I double click. And now I can move these around. Like I can, if I want it to be a little bit taller there, I want it to be thinner in this space. I really just don't want to go much below this line right here. So I'm just kind of moving and manipulating this around. I'm going to finish the sketch. And now when I revolve it, I'm just revolving. I'm going to take off the revolve of this. I don't want that. And I just want this right here. So you can see it has a nice smooth transition here. It runs up to here. And this whole piece now is revolved, and I get this nice looking shape for the end of my pin. And you can do this however you want. This is where you get to be creative. What do you want this to look like and feel like in your hand? So if you don't like that shape, move it around. You're like, oh, maybe I want to do it more like this. Now here's what you have to be worried about, is this cannot come forward of this. Bless you. This can't come forward of this. So you might have to put a tangent constraint and say that this line here is tangent or it needs to be vertical. So now it can't come forward of that. And the other stipulation I have is that the top distance should not be any more than basically 1/4 of an inch from here. So I like to put a single line or a rectangle that is a construction rectangle that goes from the midline and just over here. It doesn't really matter where you drop it. But then when you dimension it, we want to dimension the line that's here. We don't want this to be any more than 0.25. So if you look, see how this is way outside the bounds? Right now this is about 1/2 an inch. So when you revolve that, how thick is your pencil or pen going to be at that thickest point? It'd be 1 inch in diameter, which that's a huge pen. So I think 1/2 inch is probably maybe 0.6. So that would mean this would be 0.3. That's probably the biggest you want to make this. So you can bring this down, so that this now is lower, and you can bring this kind of up into here if you want this to be a tighter turn. And you can kind of get an idea of what this pen might look like here. Based on this, we can finish that, and now we have a nice profile for the pen that we're making. But we want to have nice, smooth transitions into this. This is maybe even a little bit much. We might want to come down a little bit more so that this right here See this? We can actually click on this line and we can modify this even. See how we can adjust this so it comes in smoother to that profile. That looks better as it comes in. And you see that's a nice smooth change from there to there. That's your goal. The backside is very similar. So when I put this together, I'll show you what the backside looks like. We're going to copy the brass tube. We're going to paste the brass tube. We're going to move it out here. So it's a copy and paste of that inner brass tube right there. We're going to join it to the back side of this ring. So it butts up against there. What didn't it like? I didn't see what the error was or the warning. So I'm going to redo it. We'll see what happens. I'm going to go here to there. Oh, yes. Okay, so the reason why it's giving me this error is because this piece right here is anchored. So I need to not anchor this part, this brass tube. So that's why it's giving me this error. It doesn't like that this is anchored, so I'm going to unground that part, and now it allows that joint to happen. So make sure that what you have anchored is just one piece. Since I made a copy of it, it made it anchored as well, but you just right-click on it and then unground it so it can move. It's just like you. If you're grounded, you can't leave. So you got to unground it so it can then move. Let's make the cap on the back side, and then I'll let you give this a shot. All right, let's do the pin cap that goes on the back end here. So we're going to turn all of these off. And we're going to do a right-click new component. We're going to call it cap. Now, a couple things with the cap. So I'm going to use the cap like this. We're essentially going to make the design. If you look at the cap, it's got a little bit of a slant. It goes down straight. It comes over, down, and then over. So it's this basic shape. And then we're just going to revolve that basic shape around this, and there's going to be our pin cap. Okay, that's kind of what it looks like. It's that simple. We just need some dimensions for it. Now, this is going to press fit into the brass tube, and this needs to be flush with like the ring and everything else. So we already know what those dimensions are, technically. So I'm going to kind of steal those dimensions and add them to this. So when I go back here, we know the dimension from here to here. I'm going to leave it this for now. And we know the dimension from here to here. And I'm going to leave this, but I'm going to modify these. So how do we know what these dimensions are? Well, the brass tube, if we go back to it, it's got to insert into the brass tube. So that hole that this cap is going in is 0.249. So that means that when I go to the cap, and I edit this, this radius is going to be 0.249 divided by 2. And you can see that now it fits inside the brass tube. It's kind of cool how we can do that. This dimension is the same dimension as the ring outer diameter. So if I go and see the center ring, and I look at it, its outer diameter is 0.348. So if I go back to my cap and I change this to 0.348 divided by 2, don't forget to divide by 2 like I did. Now you'll see that it lines up perfectly with this. And now we just need to figure out, okay, how tall is the thing? So we can move this up and down. And then how tall is this? So we have like 3 more dimensions to figure out. So we know it's not that big giant thing. So we need to know, okay, what's the dimension from here to here? So that's just a shoulder. Now by shoulder, I mean like we're going to use the shoulder step on our dial caliper to measure this distance. So again, I'm getting my cap out here. I'm going to measure that distance. Now there's some detail in there. We don't need to put that detail. I get 0.193. So 0.193 is that distance. And then I'm going to measure the overall height. Not that. I'm going to measure what's the overall height of this thing. So I'm just going to clamp on top and bottom here. And this is 0.316. 0.316. And then it wants me to figure out, okay, if that's that height, what's this one right here? And this is just kind of an estimate. I'm gonna grab it. I'm gonna kind of estimate what that value is. It looks like it's 0.9 or 0.095. And there we have it. So that is my cap. I can then activate the whole thing, and I'm going to turn on these brass tubes. Uh-oh. I'm going to turn these on, and then that cap is going to go down here on this end. So I'm going to do a joint. I'm going to insert the cap in all the way into here. So it's going to fit all the way in just like that. Say okay. And there is the cap. Now, I'm going to go back to this center ring, and I'm going to get rid of this fillet. I'm going to say okay. I'm getting rid of the fillet for a reason. And then I'm going to just adjust the joints. So you just double click on the joint and say okay, and it usually fixes it. Now, get that done, and then we will look at the back part of the wood piece here. All right, we didn't change the material of the cap, so I'm going to do that first. We're going to right click, go to physical material. We already have it here. I'm going to drag and drop it in there. Again, barely changed the color, but it did. And now we're going to add the wood piece in the back. So we're going to right click. We're going to go new component. We'll call this wood back. And now when we create a sketch for the wood back, we want to make sure it goes through this part. Same thing. So we're going to click on this plane right here, which runs right through that brass tube. And now we want to build it on this back end. So we're going to use a project command. And we're going to project this and this and this and say okay. And that gives us all the dimensions we need. So we're going to draw a line between here and here. We're going to have a midline that runs from here to here, which we are not revolving that piece. Okay, the piece that we're going to revolve revolves from here to here. So it's this upper one. And then we're going to make all of our detail up on top. So using the spline tool, this one's going to be very kind of docile in terms of like, I'm not going to have a whole lot of detail here on this. I want it to be fairly slim. I don't need a lot of movement on this. So keeping it slim, keeping it like this. That looks pretty good. When I finish this, I'm going to revolve these two pieces here and here. So the profile is this, and the axis is going to be this one right here. And there's my fairly simple shape. I'm going to not change the material just yet because I'm going to put in some detail grooves that I think some of you might want to add to this. So very basic shape for that. But when you look at the whole pin itself, that's a good ergonomic looking pin. All right, try that. Get this shape the way you want. Then we're going to put some detail in there. The other thing you can check is you can turn off the cap, and you should be able to see that brass tube right inside there. So it should be glued inside that wood piece. Now, the wood piece can move until we join it and say, okay, we're going to join this tube to this one, and then say okay. Now it won't move. It'll move when you move the pin. Oh, this one wasn't attached. Uh-oh. Joint. Grab the front of this, front of that. Boom. Now, the brass tube is anchored, so that's why the whole thing doesn't move. But if I turn this off and unground it, you can see that I can move this around now. And I can move it, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to keep it anchored. All right, turn the cap back on. Let's add some detail back into our wood back. So make sure it's active. Go back to this sketch. Here's the easiest way to do it, folks. Use a circle and make little circles that are about 30 thousandths in size. So we're going to dimension one of them, 0.03. We're going to use the equals constraint. Now, if I want these equally spaced along here, I'm going to dimension from here to here. So use the D-dimension command. And I want it to be, see the difference? So look here. If you go up, it'll do a vertical dimension. If you go to the side, it's going to do a horizontal, or I'm sorry. Here it goes, it does a horizontal dimension. Here it does a vertical dimension. And then this does one along the distance there. So I want to do that, and I'm going to put them at 0.085 apart. And then I'm going to do one here to here. Same thing, along that curve, 0.085. And then I'm going to do a distance from here to here. And this one I'm just going to do a horizontal distance. So I want to know horizontally. I'm going to push this down to like 0.25. So I push them along that curve. Put these three little grooves in there. And then when I finish the sketch, go back to the revolve and I unselect, hold down Control and deselect those parts. And now you can see I've got grooves in the part. Now, if you're like, I want them spaced further than that. Okay, great. Go back to here, change this number, maybe make it 0.125. And then I'm just going to say this one's the same as this. And now they're further apart. Now we can right click and go to physical material. We're going to make this one walnut. And now here's the cool thing, is if you want to pretend that these are burnt, okay, like these little grooves are burnt in here, we can just change the appearance of those grooves. So this groove right here, we can change the appearance of just that. Okay, so we can select, so I'm going to go into paint, I'll do glossy and I'll do black, and I'm just going to put black glossy paint in this groove. Oh, missed it. We'll do the whole thing and then let's see if it lets me just do. So you can click on it and then click and drag into that space. So now you can see it's a little tough with the walnut. Let me see if I get a different piece of wood. Let me do the oak. All right, let's try it again. So I can do the glossy. I'm going to select this and go gloss. And select this and go gloss. And select this and go black gloss. And now you can see that it's got kind of the burn rings in it. Turn everything else back on. There we go. The only thing you need to make now is the pin tip and a pin clip, and you're in business with your pin. All right, everybody, have a great day. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, don't forget, stop watching, start making, go build something great today. We'll see you next time.